Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues. Today is part 3 of Keep the Noahide Laws, the Noahide Laws, or Die, part 3. All right, Rabbi, welcome back. How are you, sir?
Doing great. It's always a pleasure to be here. So, of course, something has to go wrong in the introduction, right?
Oh, it's only, I forgot to say checkmate. I'm just kidding.
Well, we wouldn't have it any other way. That's why we do this.
Rabbi Chaim Checkmate Coffman in the blue corner. That's funny. Cool. So how you doing today, sir? We never do any small talk. We usually do our small talking before we
start.
Doing great.
Going through Hanukkah, had family Hanukkah party.
Yes,
had everybody here.
Very nice.
Everyone's enjoying, stuffing their face with donuts. It's all part of the fun.
Mm-hmm.
All part of the fun. So, just got some good rain also. It's also good. We also need rain here. So, a lot of good things. Definitely a lot of good things going on.
Very good. Very good. Well, all right. Well, I guess we'll let you kick it back off. And so part 3, here we come.
Yeah, again, pleasure to be here. And, as we see, there are a number of things we mentioned the last few weeks, about Noahide laws, what a non-Jew, is obligated to do or shouldn't do or stay away from. So this week, interesting question. Someone asked, my mother, my sister, my father walking around immodestly. And I guess they live at home. And, let's say in the summertime. Or even, I guess, not in the summertime. I guess we kind of difficult to do that in the winter because it's probably freezing unless the heat's way up, right? Regardless, is it a sin for for Noahide being that environment, i.e., to live at home, which there's a subset question, which would be about respecting parents, right? In other words, the second question is, if my mother, tells me not to listen to rabbis' lectures. Parents have to be tremendous anti-Semites. So are they allowed to not listen to them? Right? Can I go against them, and listen to lectures? Now I've got that question by Jews as well, where someone was living at home and the Jewish parents really hate religion. They don't want, their kids to have really that much to do with it, to be so religious or whatever. And that was a question that came up if they're, watching a video, or learning Torah and the parents don't want them to, are they allowed to lie? Right? Torah says clear, obviously you're not allowed to lie. There are cases where, certainly would be permitted to lie. A number of cases that could be permitted, certainly permitted to lie. So we're gonna tie that in. So basically the question here is gonna revolve around the idea about modesty, right? Are there obligations for non-Jews when it comes to modesty? Now we know there are forbidden relationships. The Rambam states clear, Maimonides states clear, forbidden relationships. For non-Jews, and homosexuality is forbidden, lesbianism would be forbidden, for a non-Jew. Also, when it comes to bestiality, right, that'd also be forbidden. So there are definite forbidden relationships for non-Jews, just as there are for Jews, right? Now the question's going to be, what about modesty? Does modesty play a role over here? So in general, we would say that, for a Noahide, what's their obligation? Their obligation is to keep whatever the Torah says that makes logical sense, right? It's something that we would have figured out pretty much ourselves, logic according to the Torah. Now, there are things that, as we mentioned, doesn't seem 100% logical, according to the Torah, even though a Noahide may be obligated in it. We mentioned before, let's say like playing with nature, right? Are you allowed to take a peach and a plum and make a nectarine? Something like that. Can you take a donkey and a horse, put them together, make a mule? Interesting enough, a mule, very strong animal, is only one problem: it's sterile, right? So it can't reproduce. So that could be, not saying necessarily it is, but it certainly could be, that's a repercussion. you play with nature, God doesn't stop you from playing with nature. But what does he do? He said, okay, you want to do this? I'm going to allow you to do it. I'm not going to stop you. But in the end, what's it going to cause? I'm going to cause this animal to be sterile and it can't reproduce. So there are things that we would think, right, as the Torah tells us, are pretty obvious. Don't kill, don't steal, etc. And there are many subset categories within those categories, because it's only the 7 laws are an umbrella, right? They're an umbrella to many other laws as well. So now I would think in general, when it comes to dress and when it comes to modesty, maybe we'd say that only applies to a Jew, right? In other words, a man has his obligation, going out in a modest way. A woman certainly has obligation and how she's going to dress, etc. So for a non-Jew, maybe we'd say that's okay, right? In other words, it's boiling hot. It's 90 degrees, 80% humidity, right? Or let's say it's almost 35 degrees, 33 degrees Celsius, right? It's extremely hot. And a woman says, it's so hot, I'm going to wear, a t-shirt, I'm going to wear shorts, or whatever it is. I'm just going to walk around in her house, outside her house, etc. So you're going to say, okay, if she walks outside, what's the big deal? So the big deal is, right, the way a person's going to dress, someone else could look, right? A guy could look and stare. So everyone will say, well, that's his problem, right? 100% that's his issue. So if that's the guy's issue, then what does it matter how the woman dresses, right? If she dresses in a provocative way, right, that's not her fault, right? If someone else looks and whatever, right, okay, they are liable 100%. So you say, doesn't matter how a woman dresses. The fact that someone, has thoughts, etc., even if he doesn't act on them, you say he's got a problem, even though, it's a pretty natural thing. So you say he's got a problem. So everyone would agree. Right? Except there's one caveat. There's always the but, as we always say. And the but over here is, what about, the Torah says you're not allowed to put a stumbling block in front of somebody. Right? Putting a stumbling block in front of someone, you can take it literally. Right? Take a blind person, can't see, you put something in front of him, doesn't have his walking stick, bam! Right? He goes into it. Right? That would be obvious. Putting the stumbling block in somebody can also mean, if, let's say, someone asks for directions, and you're not exactly sure. You say, oh, yeah, that place, go to the right, go to the left. 2 blocks down, you take a left. 3 blocks, take a right, whatever, and it's right there. And let's say, lo and behold, you made a mistake. Whatever, you took them out of their way. You gave them wrong directions. That's also putting a stumbling block, right? Even if you didn't have intention. You had the best intention, right? You wanted them to get to the right destination, but you weren't 100% sure. So if you're not 100% sure, you don't have ways. So what do you tell them? You say, I don't know. You say, I'm not sure. Why? Because if you give wrong direction, you put a stumbling block in front of them. So now the question on the floor is, okay, so now what about a non-Jew over here? Right? Non-Jewish woman walks down the street, right? She's walking down the street and dresses however she dresses, and someone turns, right? Someone looks. So let's say maybe she's not dressed in a provocative way, but let's say she's caked up in makeup, right? She puts on a lot of makeup, a lot of perfume, and causes someone to look because, there's a smell. Might be a nice smell. I'm not saying not, right? But even so, a person looks. So the woman will say, what are you looking for? Right? Well, that's your issue. But the question is, if they dress or put on enough makeup or whatever it is, and they do it in such a provocative way, right? Is that to say that she transgresses, even as a non-Jew? Does she transgress the Torah prohibition of putting a stumbling block in front of someone else? So there's a whole discussion, the major discussion among the rabbinical authorities, whether putting a stumbling block in front of for a non-Jew is forbidden. Right? That's really what the question revolves around. But the idea is, should it matter? Why do we have to come on this idea of putting a stumbling block in front of someone else, right? Why can't we just say there are laws for non-Jews, there are laws for Jews? For a Jew, this would be forbidden, right? That'd be nothing to talk about. But for a non-Jew, it doesn't apply, right? Maybe we'll say for a non-Jew, it doesn't apply. Now, Now, we've mentioned many times that there's an idea of a moral imperative, right? The moral imperative says this does not come under the Noahide laws. This is not part of the Noahide laws at all. But what is it? It's something that is going to take away their service to God, right? They have an obligation to be close to God. They have their own obligations, right? Certainly to do, obviously, as we mentioned last week, right? We spoke about the fact that they shouldn't overstep their boundaries, right? In other words, whatever a Jew is going to do can do. And, and a non-Jew, there are things that are off limits, right? We spoke a little bit earlier about, we're in the time of Hanukkah now. A non-Jew shouldn't be lighting Hanukkah candles unless they're in the process of conversion. And if they want to light Hanukkah candles, okay, but you're not going to make a blessing on it. You're not going to do it, well, like a Jew. You don't want to straddle the line, right? So here, okay, a person can dress however they're going to dress. So do we say that really they can dress however they want? Whoever's going to look, and if they do look, that's their problem, right? Even if they're dressed in a provocative way, right? Nonetheless, there should not be a transgression over here, right? Because of this idea of putting a stumbling block in front of someone else may not apply to a non-Jew. But what about the idea, even if it's not one of the Noahide laws, what would I say about a moral imperative, right? In other words, we're always asking ourselves on a daily basis. Really, it should be on a second-to-second basis. Is this going to benefit me? It's going to benefit my soul? Or it's not going to benefit my soul? Am I going to get closer to God by doing this? Or not? So we live in a very leftist society. I don't think there's any question about that, right? Not so much different from Rome way back when. And that's actually what destroyed Rome from the inside, is all this provocativeness and decadence, and all that. So you might say, okay, it's not my fault whatever someone else does, right? But how do I see myself? So the person can say on the one hand, I look good this way. I want to look good this way. I want to, person's got a nice body. They want to show off their body. Oh, so that's a problem. Right? Why would that be a problem? So that's exactly what the Greeks were. It's all about Hanukkah, right? Don't be like the Greeks because they worship the body. So therefore, obviously, there should be laws of modesty. Even though I heard, all kinds of things, yesterday, sort of debunking that, people talking about, their lives and, what they're doing. All these things, like unbelievably immodest things. People would say, well, that's the way of the world. That's the norm. This is what people do. And our answer is, we don't care what people do. We don't care what the world does. We want to know, does this benefit my soul or it doesn't? Now, a woman, all these women listening out there, right? So women can dress in different ways. So they can dress in one way where, it's absolutely modest, and therefore no one's really going to look because, let's say, a woman's wearing a skirt, right? People may look anyway, but, especially if it's tight and it's short or whatever, but we'll try and keep this PG-13, right? But even if they're going to dress a certain way and somebody looks, it's their issue if they're dressed properly. Now, they could dress that way. Or they could dress, let's say it's very hot, like we mentioned, and they want to wear shorts, right? They're not going to cover their legs. They're going to wear a t-shirt, whatever it is. And, and no pun intended, they're going to let it all hang out. So they could dress that way also. Now, a person can say, well, I'm very comfortable dressing this way. I'm very comfortable, with my own body. And if someone's got a problem, it's their problem. But at the same time, we could say, on the flip side, that dressing in a certain way, right? I'm not saying, a person, God forbid, deserves to be taken advantage of, right? For sure not, right? We're not talking about that. But someone who dresses in a certain way. So a person can say, why it's certain expectations. You're going to say, why do you have certain expectations? Why in the world should be there certain expectations? Doesn't make sense. You got to learn to control yourself, and that's your issue. I'm going to dress the way I want. So I would say like this, I remember, I was much younger, and when I went to synagogue, on the Sabbath, I had to dress a certain way. Right? I saw how other people dressed, and it was pretty horrific. But I was forced to dress a certain way. What did that mean? It meant that you go to synagogue, you have to show respect. Right? It is a place of God. I mean, in most places, other places just a big joke. But it is a place of worship. It is a place of God. So if that's the case, you got to show respect. Now if we believe God is everywhere, right? God is omnipotent. God is everywhere. Why don't I have to show respect wherever I go? Right? And people make the mistake and say, well, whatever you do in your house, fine. Do in your house, right? Moshe Mendelssohn, do whatever you want in your house. When you come out of your house, be like everybody else. Dress like them, eat like them, go to their ball games, entertainment, do all these things, right? Be the cardiac Jew. So no one you can say that doesn't apply to me, right? I don't have any connection to that. But I would say if a woman dresses one way and dresses a different way, she's going to see the difference, right? She's going to feel the difference. She can always make the claim, I don't care how other people look at me. That's not my issue. I'm going to dress the way I feel comfortable and, let the chips fall where they may. Somebody looks, they look. That's not my issue, right? But the idea is she's going to dress a different way. She chose not to. So there are two issues. There's an issue on the side of a woman. There's an issue on the side of the man, right? There's an issue for Jews, an issue for non-Jews. So we'll make it easy. For a Jew, dressing in a provocative way for a woman's forbidden, right? She has to cover her elbows, got to cover her legs, thigh high, stockings, whatever it is. Skirt should be below her knee. Even when she sits down, right? Should be, she should have a collar, nothing should hang out. By a non-Jew, that really doesn't apply, right? Essentially, it doesn't apply. The only problem is that people are affected by what they see. And if they're affected by what they see, then we come back to this idea that they're putting a stumbling block. But you're going to say, come on, if you would ask most people, Jews or non-Jews, right? Secular Jews, you would ask them, is this an issue? And what are they going to tell you? They're going to say it's an issue for you. For you, that's the issue. Let her dress however she wants. Who do you have the right to say, how's she going to dress? She's not going to dress. You don't have any right to say. Well, the difference is we're affected. So so now people may see, you may see ultra-Orthodox Jews when they walk in the street, even in a religious neighborhood, they don't look up. Their eyes don't look up. They look to the ground. They look in other directions not to see anything. Why don't they want to see anything? Even by women that are dressed modestly. People will say, come on, that's crazy as saying, why do I have to do that? They can't greet women and all this. What's the reason? Because they don't want to be tempted. They don't want to be tempted to look at something they're not supposed to look at, even if they're dressed modestly. Now, I would say if they're dressed modestly, it's better, right? 100% it's better. But even if a person's going to look, that's their issue. So you're going to say, well, it doesn't matter. If she dresses one way, she dresses another way, it's still on the guy. So what difference does it make? Right? Shouldn't make any difference at all. And the answer is there is a difference. Because if a guy's going to look and she's dressed properly, okay, that's 100% on him. But if he's caused to look, and I'm not saying necessarily just staring, but, he's caused to look by the way she's dressed. And she doesn't give one iota, doesn't care at all, about herself, so to speak, and she's going to dress in a certain way, then that perhaps is problematic. And as we mentioned before, the way a person dresses, I can tell you, someone who works in Wall Street and they have to wear, a double-breasted suit or a single-breasted suit, right? What's one of the first things they're going to do when they get home? Either turn on the TV or change their clothes, right? Probably in that order. Or maybe change their clothes, then turn on the TV, whatever. Why are they going to change their clothes? They're going to change their clothes because that's what they do for work. But that doesn't define, who they are. So I had this conversation with somebody once, and he was, very upset, the way I dress. And he's like, you embarrass me in public, the way I'm dressed. I'm like, I don't know, I wear a white shirt, black or with pinstripes, dark blue with pinstripes, whatever the suit is, I wear a hat. I said, what's the difference? So obviously Sorry, and I said, I wear yarmulke on my head, I wear tzitzis, okay, so there are a little bit of differences. But I asked the $1 million question, and I said, okay, so why do you dress the way you do? I said, you go to work, you work in Wall Street, whatever it is, you got an obligation to dress a certain way. Why do you have an obligation to dress a certain way? Because that's the nature of the job, right? Double-breasted suit, not double-breasted suit. You aren't walking in Wall Street without a suit, right? That's just the way it is. And for a lot of jobs could be like that. So I told this person, I said, well, there's a major difference over here. What's the major difference? The major difference is you're dressing up for money. Because what's the first thing you do when you get home? You change your clothes. So you're going to say, I'm not my clothes, right? I'm definitely not my clothes. But what am I? I'm dressing up for the sake of the job. So the person got, you can imagine, I very easily tick people off. So they got totally annoyed. And they said, okay, so why do you dress the way you do? So I said, I dress the way I do because that's what God wants from me. You wear darker clothes, it's an idea of modesty, not bright colors, you want to bring attention to yourself, other things, there's a major difference. There's a uniform, right? In an ultra-Orthodox community, there's a uniform. Now, by non-Jews, you'll tell me there is no uniform. True, right? There may not be a uniform, but there is something to the fact of the way somebody dresses. And if they dress in a provocative way, then it can cause the person to look, to stare, whatever. And yeah, that's his problem. He's going to pay a price. And that's her problem. She caused it. Now, even if the rest of the world's going to say, you know what? That's the way it is. And it really doesn't matter. And you have to deal with your issue. Go see a shrink. Go speak to someone and work on that aspect of your life, which is true. They have to. Right? That's something that they would have to work on. But if someone is blatant, in the way they dress and they don't seem to care, then if they don't seem to care, then there's an issue of causing others to stumble. Right? There is that issue. So the question came up, okay, what about family? What about the way family dresses? Now, the way family dresses should not be that big of a deal unless, they're walking around naked or whatever, right? But why isn't it that big of a deal? It's not that big of a deal for one very simple reason, and that is because they're a blood relationship that in general you would never ever have relations with. You would never be with, even though the beginning of time, Cain and Abel, right? They had twin sisters, right? They married their twin sisters. That's one of the reasons, Cain killed them. The whole thing about that with the twin sisters. So incest was permissible before the Torah was given, right? So, people would say even today, well, we're not gonna have, let's say we're not gonna have kids. Right? So you don't have that, genetic issue. Well, you save money. You only have to invite one side of the family to the wedding, right? You'll save money over here. Practical, right? But the Torah says, no, I'm not allowed, I'm not allowed to do that. So it's not 100%. It's not a natural, it's not a natural attraction. Now, it could be with stepkids, or whatever, there could be an issue there. And there are definite issues with, being alone together, etc. But, that I could hear is more of a problem, but when it comes to really blood relatives, mother, father, kids, etc. So that type of relationship is certainly not normal. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, right? I'm sure it exists, right? But it's not, just like homosexuality, and other types of, perverted behavior. That's what it is, right? It's not a normal type of thing. So the question over here is, okay, if they walk around in a not modest way. Now, I would normally think if it's let's say, the person's sister, right? Or, it's a sister's brother, they walk around that way, are they going to have these, these sexual thoughts? So I would normally say, this is like, a really abnormal type of thing. But, our minds can play tricks on us also. They can, the evil inclination can put all kinds of things, as stumbling blocks in our way, in our mind, etc. And the person could think, well, there's nothing wrong with this. So what's the big deal? You see them half naked. I'm never going to act on it, right? I'm never going to, maybe the person's going to say, it's my sister. I'm never going to think of her in that way. Or it's my brother. I'm never going to think of him in that way. Maybe true, right? Maybe true. Nonetheless, there are modesty laws for that as well, right? One example is, let's say the parents go out of town. The parents go out of town and you have children left at home that are, over the age of bar bat mitzvah. Let's say, over 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy. And, let's say there, a few teenagers there, without younger siblings. So them staying by themselves, according to Jewish law, is problematic, right? They should have someone else staying there, or they should stay in other places, right? So there is a hashash, there is a worry over here that something potentially could happen. So someone will say, come on, this is really far-fetched. You really think, a brother and a sister? Don't think it's never happened, right? We're not living in Victorian England. It's not like it ever happened. Like the rabbis have to come and say, oh, you got to be careful for this because we're looking at something so far-fetched, something we can't imagine ever happening. And guess what? It's happened, right? It's definitely happened. So it comes on the code of Jewish law and says, no, says it's definitely better, no question about it, if the parents leave, for a few days. I'm not saying if they go out at night and they come back, that's not an issue, right? But if they go away for a few days, right, 2-3 days, they come back, that's going to be an issue if you have a teenage boy and a girl, obviously brother and sister, by themselves. That is certainly a no-no. Not only that, but after a certain age, a brother and sister shouldn't necessarily hug each other. So again, you got to say, come on, it's not a natural attraction. You're right. It may not be, but they want to nip things in the bud. They want to make sure these things don't happen. So for a Jew, I would say 100%, they have to dress in a modest way, right? In the house. That's how most parents are going to, educate their kids, if they boys and girls, whatever, the girls, there's a certain age. There's going to be a certain age where they're not going to be able to bathe together, right? They're not going to be able to swim together, right? Seemingly, even if they're covered up, right? Let's say, teenage kids, they want to go, they have a pool, and they want to go swimming, and the girls wear robes. So you can't see anything, right? They're not wearing bikinis, they're wearing robes. So many rabbinical authorities hold, still, even in such a circumstance, should be forbidden. What about, let's say, family rents a villa, right? They rent a villa and there's a pool there. Can you have sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws go swimming together? So that's obviously a problem, right? That's definitely more, more of an issue. Definitely more of an issue. But I'm saying even within the same family. So someone's going to say, come on, the same family, what are they thinking? What's the mindset? How can it be someone's actually going to think about doing something with their sibling? Okay, they had to make decrees. It wasn't based on nothing. A lot of these, if you look at Leviticus chapter 18, that we read on Yom Kippur, right? Read by Mincha, by the afternoon service on Yom Kippur, right? What do we see? All these forbidden relationships, between an uncle and his niece, even though actually it is actually it is permissible, but we see whatever we see, between a father-in-law, will make it easy, a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law, right? Something like that. You can't uncover the nakedness. It's interesting. You go through all these forbidden relationships and you read it on the holiest day of the year, right? By the afternoon service, when things are winding down, you're getting hungry, probably have a headache, etc. But you're reading these verses against immorality, right? Immorality, where the Torah says, okay, you can't uncover this nakedness, can't uncover that nakedness, can't do this, can't do that, right? On the holiest day of the year, what's God telling you? This is something that's so severe, you got to guard yourself against it, right? You're going to say, but, it's not, how possible is it? how really possible is it that someone's going to do X, Y, or Z? So obviously God, Torah, the rabbis, they certainly understood. So for a Jew, there's no question, that his daughters, once they become older, certainly walking around the house, etc., they have to walk in they have to wear, modest clothing. After a certain age, siblings can't bathe together. It's just, not going to happen. That's going to be forbidden. So now we're going to backtrack here, get back to the, to this case of a non-Jew. Does this apply or not? Now, this non-Jew could say, my sister, to me is like a rock. I would never be attracted. I would never this. I would never think of my sister in that way. Okay. Maybe most people will say that. Maybe they'll say they'll never have this type of relationship. It'll never enter their mind. They'll never have this connection, etc. But being around people that are partially dressed, I would think, also has a negative effect, right? It just makes it more lighter in your eyes. If it makes it more lighter in your eyes, then it affects your soul. If it affects your soul, then it's a terrible thing. Then it's certainly not a good thing, and it's going to take that much more effort, to get that out of your mind, right? Again, it's one of the three things every Jew, has to give up their life for, right? That is immorality. But immorality could also be going to a mixed beach, even if you don't do anything, just by going there, person may have to forfeit their life just because the way people are dressed. So are we going to take that so far and we're going to say, oh, but that affects family, family as well? And people say, well, you need to see a shrink. You need to go see somebody because that is the most unnatural, desire that anyone would ever have. Now, that could be, but it doesn't negate the fact that it can happen. It doesn't negate the fact that a person can have certain sensitivities, and then those sensitivities go by the wayside because, lust, desire, other things, one thing could lead to another, so they nip it in the bud. So in this case for non-Jews, I wouldn't say it's necessarily forbidden, right? It wouldn't, they're talking, when it comes to non-Jews, forbidden relationships, right? We're talking about when they consummate the relationship, etc. So here, okay, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong, per se, but it, as a moral imperative, I would say it can affect the soul in a negative way, right? So someone's going to say, so the question is, if they live at home and the mother and the sisters don't dress appropriately, which gets now to the second part of the question, right? The second part of the question is, my mother tells me not to listen to the rabbi's lectures. Do I have to listen to them? Now, what happens in this case where this person says, can you dress a little bit more modestly and not walk around in your underwear, right? They say it obviously, hopefully in a nice way, and say, listen, I'm really sensitive to this. Can you, whatever. And, if they give you a hard time, now again, we're not necessarily saying this is, something forbidden. So the question would be, are they allowed to live in such a place? So they're allowed to live in such a place. Now, if it affects them in a negative way, which quite potentially it could, right? So therefore what? They probably shouldn't live at home, if possible. If they don't have a choice and they're stuck at home for whatever reason, so then they have to be careful, because if they're not going to listen, they're not going to listen. But then that gets into the question. It's a good segue. Gets into the question: what's my obligation? What's a non-Jew's obligation? What's a non-Jew's obligation to their parents? Do they have an obligation to listen to their parents? Can they lie? Right? If they're learning Torah. So I had a Jew ask me this question. Parents were, rabidly against, learning too much Torah, changing the norm, doing all these other things. And this person, any minute that, they weren't, in school, studying or whatever, they listened to lectures, right? Or they were learning or whatever it was. So the question became, I mean, it got worse because, the father got very upset, extremely upset. And the person said, well, what if I get smacked around? What if my father said, listen, do this, I'm going to smack you. Now, I can't imagine ever, that happening, considering I have 7 kids, right? I couldn't imagine that ever happening. But even if it would, obviously you have a right to defend yourself, right? But if it's going to come to that, you're allowed to lie, right? So were you learning? You say no, right? Why are you allowed to lie in such a case? Because learning Torah is more important than anything else. Now, if you can't stand up to your parents and you're still there and they're giving you a tremendously hard time, mental abuse, mental abuse for sure. I'm not even talking about, physical abuse. So, you more than anything else want to learn Torah. You got free time, and they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. They may take away your books, may take away your phylacteries, your tefillin. These things, it's a horrific situation, right? It could very well be a horrific situation. So in that case, you don't have to be a martyr. You don't have to say, yes, I was learning. Go ahead. Beat me. Go ahead. Do this, right? Obviously, the person who stand up to the parents is very hard, right? And not an easy thing to do in general. But, if you can't do that, then if they're asking you, are you doing this? You can lie. In that case, you'll be allowed to lie. It's obviously better, no question, to say the truth, and, stand up to them. But, someone may not be able to do that. It's hard, right? Especially if you've been, mentally abused for a long time. And yeah, you're by yourself. The whole rest of the world thinks you're a fruitcake, right? Even if, you're watching all these videos, you're trying to get strong, but you get beaten down, right? You get beaten down, spiritually. So in that case, we'll just throw this out there. In that case, what's the obligation of honoring parents, right? Honoring parents, one of the 10 commandments. It's one of the 2 commandments that the Torah says you get long life, meaning in the spiritual world. That you get long life in the spiritual world for honoring parents. What's the other mitzvah? The other mitzvah is Shiluach HaKen. Shiluach HaKen means I push away the mother bird when it's hovering over the eggs, at a certain time period, and I take away the eggs. Now, most people would say that's absolutely cruel. How could you shoo away the mother bird, and take the eggs? And the Talmud says, if you say that, you're a heretic, right? If you say, well, I have to be compassionate over here. Where's compassion? God says it's a decree. This is what I want you to do. It's going to give you long life in the next world. But those are the only 2 mitzvahs. There are no other mitzvah that the Torah says you're going to get long life except for this. So therefore, in such a case, where a person is either getting physically abused or mentally abused, is there an obligation to honor parents? Now, what are we talking about honoring parents? Honoring parents means they walk in a room, at least once a day you should stand up for them. That's honor. Right? You don't sit where they sit unless they give you permission, right? Synagogue, same thing. Unless they give you, your father would give you permission to sit in his seat. Okay. Otherwise, I'm not allowed, right? That's a sign of disrespect. You're not allowed to contradict them. You're not allowed to embarrass them. Now, what if they say something against Torah? Right? What if they blaspheme against Torah? Can I answer them and say you're wrong? So the answer is no. You're obligated to say, well, I think in the Torah it says like this. So if you say it in that way, maybe, hopefully they'll understand what they're doing is wrong, right? You're not telling them directly, hey, Mom, Dad, you're wrong. Think again, wrong verse, wrong chapter, wrong, right? That is seen as being disrespectful. If they talk, they're in the middle of a conversation, or whatever, you can't interrupt them. Now, you can imagine, in my case, that'd be very hard, right? Because I like to talk. So if I like to talk and someone else is talking, you interrupt them. But, obviously you have to have, what they call proper derech eretz, right? You have to, how to deal with others. You cannot contradict them, right? You cannot interrupt them. Now, what happens if the person, the mother or the father, are abusive, right? Whether they're physically abusive, whether they are mentally abusive. So the idea is that this person is called evil, right? They're going against what God wants. They are called evil. If a parent is evil, is there an obligation? Does the person have an obligation to honor them? So for a Jew, he doesn't have an obligation to honor them, but he cannot disparage them. He cannot make fun of them. cannot embarrass them in public. And it doesn't matter what they do. The Talmud tells many stories, of rabbis that let's say their mother was very abusive. There's a story, one rabbi where I don't think the mother smacked him, spit at him, and then, threw his purse, whatever he had in his bag, and just threw it in the river. Now, obviously, if that happened to us, we'd be rip-roaring mad. We're like, Mom, what are you doing? You jump up and down, you start yelling and screaming, probably cursed in the process. And, allowed to do that. Even if they do that, obviously you have an obligation to protect yourself, right? That there's no question, right? But somebody does something like that, the halacha is, I can't say anything against them, right? It's honoring parents. It's a very, very hard, it's a very, very hard thing, right? One of the rabbis said, thank God they didn't have that mitzvah. The mother died in childbirth, the father died shortly thereafter, so he didn't have parents. So it's thank God I didn't have parents in the sense where I didn't have these obligations. Because what's this rabbi telling you? He's telling you it's almost impossible to uphold these laws, right? Very, very difficult to honor parents in general. So now, what about someone who's abusive, right? Whether physically abusive, mentally abusive, there's an obligation to protect yourself, no question. Even though you're not allowed to make a wound in a parent, they come swinging at you with a club, with a Louisville slugger or a knife or something. I have an obligation to protect myself, even if you make a wound in them, right? You have to be careful, but you have an obligation to protect yourself. So in this case about abuse, there's a difference of opinion between the Tur, the son of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, and the Rambam. According to one, if somebody is evil, doesn't matter why they're evil, absolutely no obligation to honor them, no obligation, stand up for them, any of these things. At the same time, I still can't embarrass them, right, etc. But, I don't have to worry about other things. According to the other opinion, absolutely, even if they are evil, absolutely you still have an obligation. You have an obligation to honor them, etc. Now, that doesn't mean that, the person's in a bad situation, and there are a lot of bad situations out there, right? It doesn't mean that a person has an obligation to speak to them every day or even once a week. For some people, the fact that they don't have a relationship is better because all they're going to do is get yelled at, screamed at, made fun of, or physically abused, mentally abused. There's no mitzvah, my language, to be a dish rag, even if it's a parent. Now they get, if they, obviously in this case they have some sort of mental issue, right? That would be clear, but they're not willing to work on it. They're not this, there's no one to talk to, so to speak. Okay, at this point I still can't embarrass them, but one opinion is I still have to honor them. They walk in a room, even if I'm there, I have to stand up for them, right? I can't contradict them, right? So all the laws still apply. So there's a difference of opinion. So practically speaking, right, if someone's in such a abusive situation, they don't have to talk to the parents. And the parents can give them guilt. Jewish mothers very good at this. Give you all kinds of guilt. Call you, yell at you, scream at you, this, that. So I would always say, I don't need another hole in my head. Right? Plenty of things that a person has to go through. Person doesn't need it, but you're going to say, come on, it's your mother, right? It's your father. They brought you into this world 100%. That is why you have an obligation to respect them. At the very least, doesn't matter what they did to you in general. I'm not talking about something egregious here, right? But you still have an obligation because without them, you wouldn't be here. At least, maybe your soul would come somewhere else. It would go to some other parents. But these parents, you have to have respect for them because they brought you in the world. Now, someone told me this many years ago, I became who I am despite my parents, right? Meaning like you took yourself out of the womb. I understood what they meant. Parents weren't all there. They weren't so loving, other things. So, I get it. But in the end, I said, well, they might have done this wrong. They might have done that wrong. They might have done other things wrong, right? But in the end, it's only because they're not educated. etc. But again, even if it's all bad or a lot of it's bad, the bottom line is you still have to respect them, right? You can't make them the pun of a joke. You can't embarrass them, so to speak. And, that's hard if a person's been beaten down by them, right? I know a number of cases, tragic, so what do you do in such a situation? If you're still living at home, you got to figure out mechanisms how to deal with it. And if you're outside the home, it doesn't mean I have to have such close contact. Or people say, come on, but it's a parent. I understand. But if they're abusive, whether physically, mentally, where does the mitzvah come in? The only place the mitzvah comes in is I cannot embarrass them in public. And, unfortunately, I know people have done this. And I'm not saying they don't have a right to be angry. They may have every single right to be angry, but they have to remember what they're doing here. They have to remember what their purpose is. Someone, I heard someone to say, someone's in a terrible situation, and what one of the parents was doing to them. So the person said, oh, you have a relationship with this person, with this parent. They said, oh, it must be, now you're going to get a chuckle out of this. They said, oh, it must be you believe and turn the other cheek. So the person said, what are you talking about? That's what the Christians believe. That's not a Jewish concept, turn the other cheek, right? So what's the answer the person gave? The answer the person gave was, oh, it must be that the only reason there's any level of respect whatsoever is because you believe in the 10 Commandments. If you didn't believe in the 10 Commandments, that we have to honor, we have to honor parents, almost regardless of what they do, in different ways. So if it wouldn't be for that, what the parent does, you should say, come on, I have an obligation to respect them. Look what they do. Look how much they've beaten them down. Or look how abusive they've been. All these different things. That's all true. That may all be true. But if there wasn't a God in heaven, there wasn't a 10 Commandments, I'd agree. So what do you need it for? You'd fight back, you'd make fun, you'd say, whatever a person's gonna say, and that'll be it. You won't have a relationship. So I've heard it go both ways. I've heard where kids denounce the parents denounce the kids, right? For any number of things. That doesn't necessarily have to do with religion at all, right? In case something, have nothing to do with religion, right? So now, in that case, right, the question was, it's a roundabout way of answering, right? The long, short answer, if my mother tells me not to listen to the rabbis' lectures, can I go against her, right? So a person who wants to learn Torah, even as a non-Jew, right, they're allowed to learn Torah. All right, what about honoring the parent, right? Don't they have an obligation at a certain level, to respect? Yeah, but they don't have the same obligation of honoring, and respecting that we do. Now, they have to be nice. They should be respectful, etc. They shouldn't, they shouldn't say, oh, you're dead wrong and you're this. And, the same things do not necessarily apply across the board. Some may, that make sense. I mean, maybe that wouldn't apply because people would say, you know what, when it comes to honoring parents, why can't I disagree? Right? If they say, well, the Torah says this, they blaspheme. And you say, what are you talking about? That's not true at all. Because the Torah says like this, and I got 50 proofs to show why it is. So most people would say that's not a problem. You're having a discussion. You're having a general discussion. So why can't I answer? So for a Jew, you got to be careful. For a non-Jew, it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe you tell me, if someone says you're dead wrong, especially if there are other people around, that's not so nice. That's definitely not so nice. I think people could understand that. The only question is, for a non-Jew, would that mean that is something that they are, that they are forbidden to do? Right? To say someone's wrong and then go prove them wrong, I don't necessarily think that's, that should be forbidden. But if they're going to say, well, if they're going to go on and say you're dead wrong and you may call them names and different things. Okay, there's a limit, right? There's a limit. So, so when it comes to a non-Jew, I would definitely say the laws of honoring parents definitely, definitely applies. But if you want to learn Torah, they don't want you to learn Torah. I mean, unless you're absolutely afraid, they're going to abuse you or, different things, if you're living at home, then you got to be careful, right? You don't want to put yourself in a dangerous situation. If you're not worried about it, you can speak freely. Okay. If not, then it should be all right to lie. So then someone will say, well, doesn't that set a bad precedent? Right? It sets a bad precedent. Why does it set a bad precedent? Because you lie about this, you lie about something else. It's never good. It's never good to lie in general. The Rabbeinu Yonah in Shari Tshuva, the gates of repentance in the third gate, speaks about 4 groups of people that do not see God's presence, right, in the next world. One of them are liars. And liars, one aspect of someone who lies is the fact that they're so used to doing it that now even the truth, they can't tell the truth anymore. They just ad-lib. One aspect of lying is they may tell a story and they got most of the things right, in the story. But what do? They fudge something, right? They made up some things. They left some details out. It's also lying, right? So you're going to say, okay, we'll give this person, cut him some slack. Why are we going to cut him some slack? They didn't do it intentionally. But even if they didn't do it intentionally, it's still forbidden, right? It still comes underneath this category. And what it can lead to, is certainly something bad. But, in this case, if you're doing it for the sake of heaven and you're doing it because, you really want to learn, even though the parents, may come down hard on you, if they find out, for that, you'd be allowed to lie. You don't have to walk on eggshells over here where the repercussions could be absolutely catastrophic. You don't want them to take things away. You don't want to get beaten. You don't want, all these other different things that can certainly happen. So in the end, what are you going to do? So you lie, and you say, yeah, or you say, no, I'm not learning, just reading this book or, whatever, but, it's certainly not Torah, you don't have anything to worry about. Okay. So in that case, you're going to have to be careful, right? But they have an obligation, to listen 100% of the time. They don't have an obligation. Torah tells me clear. Rashi brings out when it talks about the laws of Shabbos, and then it says you have to keep Shabbos, and it says you have to honor parents. So what's the connection? Because we know there's a juxtaposition of the verses, right? So what's the connection? So Rashi says if a parent says, I want you to desecrate Shabbos, no mitzvah to listen to them. But it's in the 10 Commandments, right? Keep Shabbos and honor your parents, right? So Rashi says, okay, what's the connection? So the connection is that if a parent tells you have to desecrate Shabbos, and I want you to desecrate Shabbos, that you can be defiant. That 100%, you have an obligation to be defiant as a Jew. You can't listen to them. You can't desecrate Shabbos. Now, there might be a lot of peer pressure. I've gotten this question also, from people living at home, and the parents want them to desecrate Shabbos, and what are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Right? Essentially, you got to stand up. You're not allowed to do it. If you can do it a different way, there are some ways around it, but other things, if they tell you that's a great Shabbos, you can't do it. You're not allowed to do it, especially, if the Jewish parent wants to uproot your religion and they want you to go against it. Right. So, that's certainly for a Jew. Now, would that work for a non-Jew? If a non-Jewish parent says, I want you to go, steal or, do this, goes against the Noahide laws. And that is forbidden. And all the Noahide laws, you do it, you go against it. The punishment is death penalty. If punishment's a death penalty, I can't listen to them. Right? You're not allowed to listen to them. So we spoke 2 weeks ago, about this idea. Well, what if they're going to kill you instead? Okay. So we spoke about that. We'll have to rewind it. Maybe sound like a chipmunk, right? Go 2 times fast. See if that's possible. So in this case, I guess, we'll wrap up over here that, listening to parents, they should do their best of their ability to, if it doesn't contradict, the laws they have to keep. And if they tell you, if they tell you in this case, they ask you and they're rabid anti-Semites, they don't want you learning Torah, in that case, you're allowed not to listen to them. You're obligated not to listen to them. So in that case, I could lie, right? That would be permissible even for a Jew. It would be permissible to lie. We're not worrying. We're not going to worry what's going to be down the line. It's going to cause one line, another line, another line. This lie that a person's doing, you're sticking up for Torah, right? You're doing it to learn more Torah. So if you're doing it to learn more Torah, right, the thought is that not only are you going to get merit for it, but you're doing it for the sake of heaven. Once it's for the sake of heaven, if it really is, and that's a huge mitzvah, you're going to say, wow, we learned something interesting, tonight that, a person get a huge mitzvah for lying, depends for what, right? Certainly for marital harmony, certain things you'd be allowed to lie for also. I mean, you don't want to get caught. that you definitely don't want to do, but, for certain things for peace in the family, you're allowed to lie. Also, but in general, we're not interested in making this a habit, because you make it into habit, down the line, it could spiral. And then a person just keeps lying and lying. But if it's done for the sake of heaven, then I would say you're nipping it in the bud, where you're doing it in such a way where you're not gonna come to this, right? And you shouldn't come to this. Also, you want to try and make sure that you don't put yourself in that situation, right? If it's possible, you might get caught off guard, etc. But if you can try and make it, possible, where you don't get in that situation, that's certainly better. But the inclination comes in many different ways. What they say, when you least expect it, that's exactly when it happens. It was recent. I'm usually not I usually have what to say in many different contexts, and whatever, I was caught off guard a little bit a few days ago, about something, and and whatever, you have to be on guard, right? You always have to think, okay, someone may say this, they may do this, whatever. You try and put as many guards up, as possible, to try and make sure you cover all situations. Doesn't always work, but at least if you're prepared, right, then you're not caught by surprise. But again, Murphy's Law, or what I would call Murphy-Stein's Law, is when you least expect it. So you always got to be prepared. If you're not prepared, you can be caught, definitely, caught off guard. So that's why, always got to be prepared. So again, in this case, honoring parents is a tremendous thing, especially for a non-Jew. But again, the applications are not exactly the same, as they would be, for a Jew. And if they have an opportunity to learn, the parents don't want them to, they can lie, right? As long as they're going to get away with it, they get caught in the lie. Let's make clear, right? If they get caught in this lie, then yeah, that's going to be a problem. If you're going to lie, make sure it's good. Make sure it's something, you're not going to get caught on, because if you get caught on it, then you're in trouble. So, I guess on that note,
we'll call that a final note.
On that note, so Coffman says, if you're going to lie, make it stick. Keep it and make sure you don't get caught. Don't blame me. You can blame William. Don't blame me. Say, Coffman said I could lie, but I didn't come up with a good enough lie, and I got caught. Well, that's not my problem. I gave you the advice. Take it. You can bank on it.
There you go. All right. Well, so guys, if you all out there in Cyberland have any topic ideas for the future for controversial issues, feel free to send those to me or to Rabbi Coffman. His website is orthodoxconversion.com, or you can find him on Facebook directly.
Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on Facebook.
Or just find him directly on Facebook. Rabbi Chaim Checkmate Coffman. Okay, there's no checkmate in there.
It's there. I'm putting it as part of the.
I just don't say.
We're gonna make a new site here.
That's funny. All right, well, good deal. All right, well, it's been fun. Had a good time. Great show, Rabbi, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Y'all have a great rest of your Hanukkah, Chag Sameach, and we will see you on the other side. Take care, everybody.
Go easy on those donuts.
Hey, next show is tonight at 7:00. Hashem willing. We'll see you guys then. Bye.